Captive Treasure, Chapter 3, Warrior's Moon. At Sweetwater River, the travel became easier. The wagons turned along the flatland and followed the river. The last week in June, the wagon train reached the town of Independence Rock. The wagons circled on the plain outside the fort. Meg and Laura followed as Carrie crawled up the rock. They scribbled their names besides those of earlier travelers. "You have to put the date, too," Laura said. "Everyone else did." Carrie nodded. She pushed her hair out of her eyes and scratched June 30th, 1853. That night, Carrie counted the days on her fingers. "What day is the 4th of July?" she asked. "Monday," her father replied. "There will be a real celebration here." "Can we stay?" Carrie asked eagerly. Mr. Talbot shook his head. "The wagon master says we're running behind schedule as it is. Most folks will celebrate tonight. How about it?" "Well, I have some yeast put by," Mrs. Talbot said. "The sage hen and rabbit you brought in this morning would make a savory pie, and maybe we could have a pound cake. Our eggs are long gone, but I've heard they have fresh eggs at the fort. They'll come dear, though." "Special days are dear as well," Mr. Talbot said. "Get your eggs. We'll celebrate." Carrie jumped up and down. "Can we have guests like we did back home?" "Why not?" Mr. Talbot laughed. "Ask the Gants family and the Greens. I think they are short in supplies right now. And the Cantrells, their baby could use some fresh milk." By nightfall, the spirit of celebration had spread through the entire camp. The gathering of families grew until all the wagon train joined the festivities. The children played games on the grassy meadows. The women brought out their best and baked as if they were home. They spread the ground sheets together to make a long table, and everyone shared what he had. Carrie feasted on buffalo steak, savory pie, dried apple fritters, fried rabbit, and roasted sage hens. When she could hold no more, she curled up on a blanket to rest. Meg and Laura came to sit with her. They lay back and watched a full moon drift in a velvety sky. "It's a copper penny," Meg said. "It's a silver medallion," Laura said. "It's a savory pie," Carrie groaned, holding her stomach. "Huh," Peter said sharply. He stepped out of the shadows near the wagon. "It's a warrior's moon." Carrie rolled over to look at him. "How do you know that?" "A trapper at the fort told me. He said the Indians use the moon to travel at night. They go long distances to raid the teepees of their enemies." He reached down to jerk on one of Carrie's braids. "So watch your hair, Red," he said. Carrie snatched her braid back and sat up. She stared at him as he walked away laughing. "Don't mind him," Laura said quietly. "Mom says he's growing too fast. It addles his mind." "If you say so," Carrie said doubtfully. She lay back down to look up at the moon. This time it didn't look so round and yellow and friendly. She went to bed that night with aching head. The next morning she groaned when she heard the warning rifle shots. For a moment she thought about staying in bed. Outside she heard her mother starting the cook fire. Slowly she crawled out from under the blankets. Her mother took one look at her and sent her back to bed. By the time the wagons were moving, she was burning with fever. For days she drifted in and out of sleep. When she awakened, a spoon was set gently against her teeth. She twisted, but the liquid still poured down her throat. Again she slept. Finally the fever passed. "You had cholera," Carrie's mother told her. Praise God it was a light case. Before a week had passed, Carrie was eager to get out of the confining wagon. She set out in search of Laura and Meg. Neither of the girls was to be seen. Carrie found their wagon way up the line. Mr. Gants walked beside the oxen. His face was lined with worry. "Have you seen Peter?" he asked. Carrie shook her head. "What's wrong?" "Joseph Edward has a fever. I think it's cholera." He swallowed hard. "I sent Peter for the doctor." Laura opened the flap of the wagon. Her face was frightened. "He's real bad, Pa," she said. "Ma wants to know if the doc is coming." Mr. Gants shaded his eyes. A rider came down the line of wagons. "He's here," he called to his wife. "He's coming." Carrie walked beside the wagon with Laura until the doctor came out. Laura told her that cholera had swept the wagon train in the last few weeks. "Micah Evans died," Laura said, "and Toby Whitehall, and little Annabelle Catlin." She looked fearfully towards the wagon. The doctor climbed out and jumped to the ground. "I left some medicine," he told Mr. Gants, "but your wife is ill also. She must have help." "I'll tell Ma," Carrie said. She ran back to the wagon. "Mrs. Gants and Joseph Edward are sick," she told her mother. "They need nursing." The wagon master heard her. He stopped beside the Talbots' wagon. "The Gants wagon needs to be separated from the rest," he said, "and I'll need help up front. We've lost another man." Mr. Talbot hesitated. "My wife will nurse the Gants family, and I can go with you if Peter will drive my wagon." The change was made. The Gants wagon fell in behind the others. Laura and Meg rode with Carrie in the Talbots' wagon, and Peter drove it in line behind his family. The girls played quietly as the wagon jolted along. By mid-morning they tired of their game and lay side by side on the sacks of flour. Carrie watched a cloud of dust on the trail behind them. "What's that behind us?" Carrie called to Peter. "Another wagon train?" Peter jumped down to look. "It's the remuda, the horses," he said impatiently. Carrie blinked and felt foolish. She knew as well as anyone that the extra horses were driven behind and allowed to graze during the day. At night they joined the oxen in the circle. She had just never ridden this far behind. "Why are you stopping?" she asked Peter. He gave her a defiant stare. "There's a roan horse that I want to see." He felt in his pocket for a lump of sugar. The horses swept around an outcropping of rocks 100 yards behind them. The men driving the horses fired shots into the air. Only then did the children see the danger. Painted riders appeared at the crest of the hill. "Indians!" Peter yelled, and he leaped onto the wagon seat, but they had lingered behind too long. The wagon train had rolled on across the ridge. Peter grabbed the whip from its socket and lashed it across the backs of the oxen. They fell into a trot. The girls were slung back and forth in the wagon. Meg began to cry. Carrie tried to steady herself long enough to reach across to the younger girl. She pushed her down between the barrel of meal and bags of seed. "Hang on!" Carrie shouted as Laura slid across the sacks of flour. Behind them they heard shrill yelps and shrieks. A gunshot ricocheted off a rock. Peter cracked the whip. The wagon jolted over the rocky trail. Carrie caught a glimpse of the horses. They were coming fast, hemmed in on both sides by the remuda drivers. She turned and peered out the flap. The wagon swayed over the ridge. Below them they saw the wagon train on flat ground. It had begun circling for protection. Their wagon picked up speed going downhill. It tilted and grazed a huge boulder. The canvas on the right side tore with a sickening sound. Carrie whirled to see the canvas flopping loose. The pocket that held the Bible was dangling over the side of the wagon. Carrie lunged across the wagon. She caught hold of one of the bare ribs of the top and reached for the pocket. On the first try she missed. The wagon swayed again and she fell forward. Her hand closed on the Bible. The wagon jolted over another outcropping of rock. Carrie slipped and fell, still clutching the dangling pocket. The canvas ripped and Carrie swung out over the side. Then the canvas gave way completely and she was dumped onto the bare ground. Carrie cradled the Bible in her arms and she rolled into the shelter of the rocks. The remuda horses and their riders plunged over the ridge behind her. They thundered past and disappeared down the trail. Shakily, Carrie got to her knees and tried to stand up. Dust clogged her nose and her loosened hair filled her mouth. Before she could run for better cover, the party of Indians charged down the slope. One of them almost ran her down. She thrust the Bible up to protect her head. The Indian's horse stumbled and fell. Its short, muscular rider sprawled in the dust. The fallen Indian scrambled up with a yell of rage. He rushed at Carrie, eyes glittering, and Carrie tried to run, but fear glued her feet to the rocky ground. She closed her eyes as the Indian raised his knife. The blow never came. Another rider had shouldered his horse between Carrie and her attacker. The man with the knife snarled and glared up at the rider, but the tall, lean Indian on the horse faced Carrie's attacker without a sign of fear. Carrie felt the rider's strong arm sweep across her back. A moment later, she found herself seated in front of the tall Indian. There was no escape. Her unbound hair whipped back as the horse lunged after the others. Still clutching her Bible, Carrie rode off in the midst of the raiders.